Hello, everybody. My name is Yacir Ortega. This is Chasing Encounters, your podcast about identity, cultures, and diversity. We are right now recording our season number 3, episode number 2, and we are glad to have another one yet important guest today on a Sunday morning. It is snowing. What a great day to shoot a podcast. So today we have with us Amir Kalan. Thank you for coming today with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Yusuf, and thank you for all the time and effort you've put in this fantastic series. It's wonderful to bring all those voices together. I mean, we are in, kind of working in an academic atmosphere where we need kind of more casual conversations of the kind you're leading, just to move us a little bit away from our kind of traditional rhetorical patterns of presentation, which happens to be a part of our conversation today as well. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. And just so the audience knows, Amir Kalan is a lecturer at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. He teaches educational research methods and research writing to Canadian pre-service teachers in the Masters of Teaching program. His research interests include critical writing studies, multilingual writing, multiliteracies, digital humanities, and practitioner inquiry. So we be a little bit before we get started to the topic for today. Our audience usually would like to know about who our guests are, where you're coming from, a little bit of your identity, your languages, culture. So maybe you can tell us a little bit that background, so our audience knows where you're coming from when it comes to research.
Absolutely. So I'm an Iranian Canadian writer and educator and an academic. So my background when it comes to textual engagement, which is the focus of our conversation today, is very multicultural and multilingual. So I was brought up writing in different languages. Mainly, I write in Persian and English. But I am connected to a number of different ethnicities in the Iranian context. So I typically introduce myself as Kurdish, Turkish, Persian, and Mazandarani. So I've always been fascinated by how different cultures contribute to our experiences with text and our textual engagements. So because of that, most of my research has focused on organic textual interactions. So by organic textual interactions, I mean how do people engage with text outside the school? That might include, for instance, in the context of the Iranian plateau, how people in villages of Central Asia engage with music and song and engage with literacy in traditional ways. But at the same time, I'm interested in organic textual practices online, for instance, because I believe that a lot of our intellectual practices, a lot of our textual interactions happen on organic online spaces as well. So that's I mean, my multicultural and plurilingual background has contributed to that focus and that interest in textual engagements through different cultural lenses, and through and in different venues.
That sounds a very interesting background. Obviously, our audience would like to know all of these things because we always believe that the person behind the writings, the research, like you said, is a human person who shares a cultural and a linguistic background. And we always like to highlight that cultural and linguistic background from the people who come to Chasing Encounters.
I think it is very important, you said, and I think uh, uh, the project we're going to talk about came out of my personal experiences because I came like a lot of Canadians. I immigrated to Canada about 10 years ago, and I was a bit shocked at how industrialized and centralized writing education in North America is. And my cultural interactions with textual experiences were really different. So I think I came from a context with more organic interactions with text, with more organic interactions with reading and writing. So I felt a bit shocked. So my entire project is really, it comes out of that experience, that how can we deal with such an industrialized educational system, specifically such an industrialized writing education system, and is this system actually doing students any good? So these have been really some of my questions. So, is the system functioning well? And how can we challenge the system to create a space for more organic writing practices?
This is a very fascinating topic that you're talking about, especially because I read your previous book about Who's Afraid of Multilingualism, and we are always asking these questions about who and what, who we're writing for, how is that we're writing, how we have been trained to write in such a way, in such a manner. So I was glad to read the first book because that's how those questions started for me as a quote unquote second language writer, right? And
Absolutely.
then we're still asking those questions, and I'm glad that you brought up in your first book. But today we're gonna be talking about your upcoming book that is coming at some point in the near future, and the book is entitled "Sociocultural and Power Relational Dimensions of Multilingual Writing," which will be published in several months by Multilingual Matters. So my first question for you in relation to this book is how does this book connect with the idea of the industrializing writing pedagogy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, as I said, I came to this project with this idea, with this question, that how is our industrialized writing education system uh, the, working effectively? And if it isn't, how we can highlight the imperfections of the system or the malfunctioning of the system. So I decided that it is very important to highlight the sociocultural and power relational aspects and dimensions of writing so that we can show people that we are missing a lot in this industrialized kind of system of writing education. So the book highlights those aspects. The book talks about what cultural kind of how cultural heritages and cultural legacies impact textual interactions. The book talks about how politics creates genres. So the genres we take for granted, for instance, academic writing or the infamous five-paragraph essay, they are deeply connected to historical power relations. They didn't come out of vacuum. So I decided that if I highlight those dimensions, then I can address a question of our highly sophisticated writing kind of pedagogies and writing curricula. So I can say that everything feels really tightly and neatly woven and wrought, but the reality is there are a lot of issues and a lot of problems because what we have done is we haven't created a great curriculum. We have just cut out social aspects of writing, cultural aspects of writing, multilingual aspects of writing, and power relational aspects of writing. That's why everything looks so neat.
Interesting. I like that introduction about the concept, and it's so interesting that you got me thinking of this word of the deindustrializing slash industrializing. It got me thinking a lot. Why? Because I have talked to a lot of folks, both researchers, academics, and teachers, and then a lot of the discussions surrounding writing comes with the idea of decolonizing. Decolonizing writing, decolonizing academia, decolonizing curriculum. So it seems that it has become this buzzword around. But in talks with indigenous friends and indigenous folks that I have contact with, in a sense, it seems that people have been using this word lightly. decolonizing, and
Yeah.
I think it's a major thing that we need to challenge. And I love the way you did not use the word decolonizing or something. It seems like everything is decolonizing something, and instead you decided to address the real issue, which is the industrialization of things. You know, the way I see it, based on my
Yeah.
experience that I have written somewhere else, the McDonaldization of education, in which
Absolutely.
the cookie cutter, approach to education, and in this case is the cookie cutter approach to writing, which you mentioned earlier, how we have been trained and we have been taught how to write in English and in specific academic English. You know, these paragraphs. This is how it should be. This is how the length of the sentences should be, and this is how you should present the ideas, compared to the way other folks around the world have traditionally been writing in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that the point you're mentioning is very interesting. Yeah, I think I could have framed this as decolonizing writing pedagogy, and I'm learning from the scholars you talked about. I think there is fascinating research going on. So part of what I'm doing is decolonizing as well, but I really wanted to highlight the structural aspects of what is happening in our writing education. So probably that's a good chance for me to tell you what I mean by our writing education is industrialized.
Yes.
Then I could address the idea of decolonization as well. So it is really fascinating how we have leveled and compartmentalized writing in different ways. I mean, it is all over the place. First, we have leveled writing. So we have really complex leveling of writing skills. So at a certain age, you can write only one genre. Then when you go to high school, these are the genres you have to engage with. Then when you go to university, this is what you can do. So we have leveled. There is a lot of research about leveled reading, but there is less research about leveled writing. I think we've done a lot of that. When it comes to our colleges and universities, I think we're dealing with a kind of, I would say, a very challenging situation of creating kind of hefty and but very cumbersome general education kind of structures. Where, for instance, if you want to do engineering at a major university in North America, you cannot get to do engineering right at the beginning. You have to do a lot of general ed courses. Some of them are great, but when writing comes into that, so you have to start practicing writing before you start writing for your own field. That's true about history. That's true about literature. So this is really strange to me that if you want to write about history and philosophy, you have to learn how to do writing beforehand. So the writing process has been separated from the context. So there is this general ed. In second language education, we have the same issue. So we have separated mainstream writing pedagogy from second language writing pedagogy in a strict ways. So when it comes again to as if there is no translingual kind of processes involved, and as if if you're a good writer in Mandarin, you cannot bring any of those experiences into mainstream kind of writing in an additional language. When it comes to second language education again, there is the same kind of compartmentalization. So you have you go to second language structures in schools where you go to one class to do grammar, you go to another class to do reading, you go to another. So skills have been separated. Right. So writing, what we've done practically, and again, another example of this kind of industrialization is the division between creative writing and academic writing. So when you just zoom back and when you look at all these tiny little kind of boxes and classes for writing, you feel you can never engage with organic writing because organic writing is academic but is creative at the same time. Organic writing is experimental. Organic writing cannot be leveled. Organic writing is plurilingual at the kind of intellectual level, and is multilingual when it comes to the manifestation on the page. So this is what I mean by in industrializing writing education. So apparently the system matches our economic systems, which are interested in packaging and selling education as recognizable products. However, I'm not sure that this system is really helping the students as much as it should be. Let's not forget, we've had wonderful writers all through history in every culture, but we've just come up with this industrialized system recently. So I'm a bit suspicious if we can claim that this system can produce very good writers. What I feel this system is producing is really kind of contextless assignments, meaningless engagements, and good money for the institutions who are selling this kind of writing education.
Definitely, those are very interesting questions that we need to be asking as educators and as researchers. Something that it got me thinking, based on what you just mentioned, is yes, we know that this is a way of packaging, producing, industrializing writing for whatever the reason is. So my question to you would be, how can we challenge that mindset of packaging and repackaging all of those sorts of things when there is an expectation from the institution anywhere in North America or everywhere else, that there is the expectation that the students, this is how they need to write in this way, this paragraph way, this is the way they need to write, right? And then there is an administrative person usually, or entity, who demands to the professors and then the teachers to, this is the way they have to be. So what is the message to teachers specifically in high school, but also in higher education, to professors, lecturers, you name it? How can we challenge that when there is this administration demanding this is how the expectation is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's the way actually I've written the book. You talked about sociocultural and power relational dimensions of multilingual writing. So in that book, I highlight those issues, but I try to address those issues, talking about what we can actually do in the classroom. So what tangible pedagogies can we have to address those issues? So the best remedy is restructuring everything, but we know it's not going to happen. So, but it doesn't mean teachers cannot engage with the students in alternative ways. So the book comes out of an empirical research project on the literate lives of some successful adult multilingual writers in the context of Toronto, which is a very diverse context. So I'm going to talk about some of these items which I learned from these writers who happen to be really my co-researchers, and we talked about this for years. So one very important issue, again, when you have an industrialized kind of writing education, you don't really care that much about what I call students' discourse practices, or when it comes to writing. Of course, discourse practices have been discussed in literacy research for a long time. So I have borrowed from that context, and what I've added to that is, when you have an industrialized writing education, you don't have time to engage with the ways that students look at text and text generation, including writing. So first, we know from a lot of research that it is important to engage with the students' perception of writing. However, what I found in my research was the additional element I was talking about is students' perceptions of writing and textual engagement are not fixed. So as teachers, you don't have a duty to identify those or guess if the student comes from this culture, they look at writing or they approach writing from this perspective. My research shows that discourse, the process of forming discourse practices is a creative process. So in every writing class, I think teachers should invite their students to creatively form and structure their own beliefs about textual engagement. What does that include? There is something that I call writing identity. I think next to teaching writing, it's, I don't know, it might be the 5-paragraph essay or other forms of writing. I think we really need to address the students' writing identity. And we need to address that creatively. We have to ask these questions. What is the textual background of these students? What kinds of texts and in what venues these students engage with text? We have to ask ourselves, what are some of the intellectual backgrounds of these students, including the intellectual backgrounds which these students borrowed from their own cultures? We have to ask, and this is a very important question, we have to know as writing instructors about the writing trajectory of our students. So again, in an industrialized writing system or writing education, we don't care about what the students bring with them in the classroom, including the perceptions and the writing trajectory, because we have the product and we have to give that product at this point on the conveyor belt to the students. My suggestion is no, our curriculum is actually our students' writing identities. So the most successful curriculum we can have is the curriculum which is added to the writing trajectory the students are already bringing with them into the classroom. So I think that's one way we teachers could really challenge the dominant industrial writing pedagogies. So instead of asking what curriculum tells us what we need to do, I think we do not, instead of asking that, I think that's a very good question. We always have to ask that. But we really need to ask, who is my student? Can I help this student create a strong writing identity? And we should remember that our students are engaging with text outside the classroom. So what is the writing trajectory? So when we clarify that, it's only at that time that we can create effective curriculum adding to a student's kind of writing background, which happens to be in most cases very rich. Yeah.
I think I agree with you 100% on what you have just said related to identity in writing. So I have a question that got me thinking. You already talk about they are already bringing something to the classroom, which is their identities and cultural backgrounds, etc. So the question, I'm going to give you an example and then a question, because I agree with you that we should bring those identities and those cultural and linguistic backgrounds in the class. And when it comes to writing, I have this idea that we should also welcome those languages
Absolutely.
in the writing if we are using a plurilingual framework, right? So I have this conversation with another professor at another university, and then the professor argued, but I don't know Spanish, I don't know Chinese, I don't know Portuguese. How I'm going to read a paper or an assignment when I don't know those languages if these people are writing in English and using their languages in their piece of writing, right? And then I don't know how to read this thing. So what's the point? The person would say. So my question to you as the expert is, what should we do in these cases?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't worry that we don't know those languages, because they know those languages and the friends and the families know those languages. So I think that question comes out of somehow, again, a mentality which has been trained by our industrial systems. Because in that system, we have a kind of industrialized assessment system as well. So in that system, you have rubrics, and probably one of the items on the rubric says, are they either using correct grammar. So of course, if I don't know Mandarin, I cannot just deal with that box on the rubric. So that's why I'm really highlighting students' writing trajectories. So if our assessment system is less interested about the stylistics of that particular Spanish paragraph, because again, we are thinking of multilingual kind of texts. So if my assessment system is less interested in the punctuation in a Spanish or in a Spanish vocabulary or Mandarin vocabulary, I'm more interested in a student's writing trajectory. You don't need to understand the language to realize that this Chinese student who is 17, actually some of the students I met in a school a couple of years ago in Toronto, who they were teenagers, but they wrote beautiful kind of Mandarin poetry for years in their lives. So if my assessment would be just trying to see if they sound okay when it comes to rhyme and rhythm in Mandarin, I would fail. However, if my assessment was, how does this multilingual piece my student has created connect with the writing trajectory, I think the grade would be A+, because we know that the writing trajectory, most of that is in a different language. So I think it's really a question. It's not. I think that question you said is not a question about if teachers know the language or not. I think it's a question about what kind of assessment techniques you're using. So I think
Yes.
they should change their assessment system, and that's why we should highlight students' writing trajectories. So sometimes I don't need to understand anything. They need to understand it, because what matters is not necessarily writing a polished product which happens to match our rubrics. The most important thing happening in a writing classroom, writing class, I would argue, is that negotiation. What I'm writing could be a part of my writing trajectory. I think that's what we should assess, what we should be assessing. Yeah.
No, definitely. I think, like I said, I mostly agree with what you have said in this regard. Definitely, I don't have any problem with that necessarily, but it's just sort of voicing concerns from
Absolutely.
people outside this paradigm. And the sort of the follow-up question of this question is, yes, let's say we allow the students to do all of those things in the classroom. We're good with that, not a problem. What's going to happen with these students when they are faced out there of their school, post graduation, in which the expectation is this is the way they're supposed to be writing for whatever thing, for a job, or they said they're looking for jobs, whatever, right? And then the expectation is different. So in a sense, we have failed them to quote unquote train them to the reality they will be facing there. So it got
Okay.
me thinking. I don't think we're gonna change society tomorrow or in a couple of years so they can accept these new paradigms that we're talking about. So if we cannot change that society, not in the near future, so we are failing our students by not giving them or teaching them the necessary tools to quote unquote survive outside in the industrialized world once they finish.
Okay, that's a very good question. Before I address this, I have to just go back to, I think you said something very interesting, that there is this voice and students are worried, teachers are worried about this. And I think they have every right to be concerned because they don't know the language, and so they feel anxious. And let's not forget, whatever I said about writing identity about the students is also true when it comes to teachers, because teachers have their own writing identities as well. So you get anxious when your student writes in a different language. So teachers have to negotiate with the writing trajectories and writing identities as well. So it's a really kind of conversation between both sides. But going back to your question, I think your question is a very important question, and it has been a very important argument. So I suggest we should do two things. First, look at our current system. So if our industrial writing education has helped our students to be part of mainstream society and be successful, in quotation marks, why is it that there is so much complaint, for instance, at university level, that we have failed to teach students writing at school? So why everybody in our environments, educational environments, feels that students are struggling with writing? So seemingly, so I think there are a lot of research projects which document that our current systems have failed. So I know that intuitively it feels as if you're helping the students, but empirically, I think we can show that our current structures have failed the students already. So the question is an alternative. The alternative, as I said, is just highlighting organic writing practices, or actually encouraging students to engage with organic writing practices. Part of that, as I said, is an emphasis on the students' writing trajectory. So if we go back to that argument, actually students can make sense of dominant forms of writing. It might be academic writing, it might be the dominant language. Our students only can make sense of those dominant genres and dominant practices if they engage with those organically, meaning if they are conscious about their own writing practices, and if we create the space for them to negotiate the writing identities, if we create a space for them to engage with genre negotiation in an organic way, to make sense of those dominant genres and dominant languages, rather than write contextless and meaningless assignments that never connect with the writing backgrounds. So this is really the alternative we should be trying.
Yeah, and I know there are some of us, if not a lot of us, who are in that mindset of trying to change things for the better, not for us as intellectuals, scholars, researchers, educators, whatever, but for the sake of the students' identities, right? So speaking of that, a little bit following up on another thought that got me thinking as you were speaking, the idea of making sense and the idea of making meaning. You know, there is not only one way or two ways. There are different ways of meaning making out there
Absolutely.
that is not that it doesn't have to be the written way, meaning the typing on a computer, the using pen and paper to write. And then we have talked about previously with other folks about literacy, different forms of literacy, and different forms of modalities as well. So I wonder if you want to speak a little bit about the role of multimodality and technology in this new paradigm of the industrialization of writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, in my empirical project that the book is based on, one major theme was what I framed as radical semiotic engagement. So successful writers heavily engage with different forms of semiotic system, usually with a good amount of intellectual substance. So it was really amazing to me that the participants in my project actually didn't really learn writing in writing classes. They learned writing when they were in organic intellectual conversations surrounding books, films, theater, drama, online writing. So one argument actually in the book, or one sort of pedagogical consideration I offer is teachers need to invite the students to radically engage with different semiotic systems. So I'll give you an example. So when I know you have a background in teaching English as an additional language as well, and you know in most of our kind of writing classes in those contexts, we invite the students to write 4-paragraph essays, for instance, for TOEFL or for IELTS, or 5-paragraph essays. The reality is there is almost zero emphasis, particularly when it comes to test preparation like TOEFL and IELTS. There is zero emphasis on intellectual engagement, which is supposed to inform your essay. So you just don't write an essay because you wake up and you go to the class and you decide you want to write an essay. You write an essay when you feel that you have something to say. Of course, again, we are going back to the story of assessment, the negative impact of a standardized, because I mentioned TOEFL and IELTS, the negative impact of a standardized testing and everything. So my argument is, if you really, as you said, that there is this perception that we might fail the students, my argument is, instead of really worrying about your students' topic sentences, you'd better just take them to a good theater which is around your class and watch something on stage, because this is not an experience that people are having every day. Instead of by radical semiotic engagement, I mean, for instance, in the context, I have been teaching a lot of native speakers of English in kind of dominantly white locations like Midwest in the US. So probably in some of those classes, I felt the biggest kind of thing I can teach, and the most important thing I can teach in this class is not really how to format a thesis. I should show them a Fellini or an Italian movie in Italian or an Indian movie in Indian to start a conversation about intellectual issues, but again expose them to alternative visual elements, alternative linguistic elements. I know we cannot do a lot of that in the classroom, and again, this is one of the arguments I'm making. That be aware that you cannot do much of that in the classroom, and that can lead me to the next theme that I can address if you have another questions. That's the significance of collaborative intellectual venues. So I don't know if you want us to talk about that as well, because I feel that's very, very important, and that's one of the negative outcomes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You should.
Yeah, so one major theme in my research was there has been a lot of research about collaborative writing, particularly in North America, particularly because you talked about technology as well. I mean, particularly with the rise of wiki writing and online writing, it's really become much easier to write collaboratively. So there were some elements of that in my research, but what was fascinating for me to find was more important than physical collaborative writing for students to succeed in writing is intellectual collaborations. So what do I mean by that? Students do not necessarily need someone who is going to correct the grammar mistakes, or going to give them feedback, like, for instance, teachers provide feedback. Successful writers always have intellectual circles that they feel they belong in, where they can go to, and when they can share not only the writing, the thoughts, their ideas, their opinions, the perspectives of the world. So my research shows that you cannot be a good writer unless you are part of one of these, what I call intellectual circles or writing circles. These writing circles usually have socio-political agendas. They usually have activist agendas. Some of them are community-based. Some of them happen with your family members. So what our industrialized writing education has done is we have demolished and we have just got rid of all these organic intellectual circles and organic kind of intellectual interactions. So I recognize the fact, I acknowledge the fact in my book that a lot of what I'm talking about when it comes to radical semiotic engagement cannot actually happen in the classroom. But in the classroom, we can start processes that might lead to those engagements. Again, going back to the idea of intellectual circles and organic writing communities, I argue that sometimes it is really more helpful to help the students find a few intellectual friends who help them with the writing journeys and generally intellectual journeys in life than just teach them how to write an effective paragraph. So again, I'll go back to the question you asked because that's again one of those typical questions you get, that aren't we failing as students not to teach them the 5-paragraph essay? I would say no. I think we are failing as students because we have practically removed all the intellectual networks they've had around them as soon as they walk into our classes. So the students organically have those connections, but we never use those connections in our writing classes. To give kind of practical, pedagogical kind of recommendations. So let's take a look at our assignments again, and let's see how many of those assignments invite students to interview a family member, for instance, in the mother tongues. How many of those assignments invite our students to do something collaboratively with friends and intellectuals outside the classroom? So you talked about some teachers who panic when they feel that their students is writing in a language they don't know. So if they change the lens, if instead of lexical and grammatical concern, the concern is my assignment helping my student to connect with some like-minded people, whether it's community members or intellectuals on city streets or musicians, artists, publishers, editors. If that's the lens, it doesn't really matter what language they write in. I think what matters is the quality of that collaboration, which may not be collaboration in writing. It might be actually intellectual collaboration, a very organic interaction about what the students are interested in.
Definitely, Amir. Thank you so much. This is great conversation. I love what you have said so far. For what I gather from what you have just said, we, and when I say we, I mean educators, researchers, intellectuals, scholars, we have to participate in some kind of shift of changing paradigms, mindsets, ideologies. In other words, how we can change those lenses that you were talking about. So, for a better word, I would say how we can revolutionize the way writing is being taught out there. So, a lot of folks out there are listening to this podcast, and most of the folks that are listening to this out there are English teachers or language teachers. Some others are researchers in the field of second language education or second language acquisition. So I wonder if you have any pointers, any specific examples of how that this idea will look in the classroom, because a lot of teachers have come to me. All of this sounds like a great idea, like an utopia, like yeah, we can see that in 50 years for sure when the world has changed and everything. But I don't see it that far. I think there are things that we can do tomorrow in my class, right? Like if you are an ESL teacher tomorrow at a college or at a university, or you're teaching writing at a university, there are things that you can do right now to help us revolutionize and change this paradigm. So I wonder if, based on both your experience and research and educate as an educator, give us a couple of specific examples that you can do in the classroom to address to make this change happen.
Yeah, a greater start for any language teacher and any writing teacher, if they want to engage with any kind of change, I think is a question of genre. So I think, as you said, this doesn't have to be revolutionary. It could happen even today. And actually, it is happening every day in every classroom. We try not to see that. So my example is, let's not look at genres as fixed kind of, as having fixed characters and as having fixed dimensions and characteristics. So what I mean by that is we typically, for instance, talk about academic writing, and this is really most of our writing pedagogy typically focuses on academic writing. But we talk about academic writing as if there is only one way of doing that. So I think a lot of our teachers, I think for good intentions, because they have a curriculum and they want to teach the curriculum, and they believe that the curriculum is going to help their students. But let's not forget that our writing curricula are developed based on fixed notions of genre. What we always need, I think what can make teachers a bit comfortable is there is no fixed genre. Genres are evolving all the time. So why is that important? Because if we look at genre like this, we can always create a bit of a space for the students to do genre negotiation. So this genre negotiation might be for learners of new languages, bringing in a little bit of their own kind of rhetorical, the mother rhetorical patterns into the story. But at different levels, it might be a little bit different. I can give you a couple of examples from my own experience. So I taught English in an Italian school for years. So I didn't know Italian, as you said, but I realized that my Italians are particularly interested in parts of English literature, which actually might be surprising for students in North America, but Italian students were interested in Shakespeare, and they liked Shakespearean sonnets. One important reason was the Shakespearean sonnets have been, I mean, the model has been borrowed from Italian literature. So they do a lot of Petrarch, for instance. So they're familiar with the sonnet system. They know a lot about that. So in the writing assignments they wrote for me, I just allowed them to use a lot of comparison with those Italian sonnets. Part of that comparison was using Italian, naturally, because they were just giving examples of Italian sonnets. So I didn't know Italian, but it didn't mean I couldn't trust them. So I created some space for them to write these multilingual texts. They were considerate of my situation. They knew about my knowledge, and I think you would be surprised how much students feel responsible when you give them the space. So they wrote pieces which included Italian, but in a way that I could read them and I could enjoy them and I could understand what they were doing. So that's one context in a multilingual context. Now, currently, I'm teaching. In a master's program called the Master of Teaching at University of Toronto, OEZ. I'm teaching research writing. So one very interesting phenomenon I'm facing is a lot of pre-service teachers either have very rich humanities backgrounds or very rich science backgrounds, and they've already written in those genres. So genres like what we do in philosophy and history, which is, for instance, heavily argument-based or depends on primary sources and secondary sources. The other group have very rich backgrounds in statistical data and quantitative research, dealing with numbers. So both groups, and again, let's not forget, we are not talking about necessarily minoritized or vulnerable populations. We're talking about an educated, mainstream kind of teacher education program with something about 99% native speakers of English. But still, both these groups are struggling with educational research writing because that happens to be a different genre. So my strategy could have been, no, you have to write exactly like this model, or create some space for these teacher candidates to bring in their own rich research backgrounds, but at the same time engage with educational research. So my recommendation is a bit of kind of a space for genre negotiation is necessary and is easy to do in every classroom. But it is very important. If you're worried about your genres, let's not forget are not fixed either. So you imagine that genre is a fixed genre because of your own writing trajectory. So that's at some point in our conversation, I highlighted the fact that writing teachers have their own writing trajectory and their own understandings of writing as well. So if they believe that students cannot respond to a particular genre, which they imagine is the fixed genre for the field they're writing in a lot of cases, the reality is they seem to somehow they have difficulty understanding their students' genres as well. So I think so it's not really a kind of one-sided relationship. It's two-sided. So if we create a bit of a space just in between for genre negotiation, I think it's something always doable. I think you could remain faithful to the curriculum and to your syllabus, but at the same time, I think you can create a space with different forms of genre engagement and multilingual engagement.
Exactly. Something that I gathered from what you just said is we need to move away from those binary mindsets that we have been taught for so long and start thinking beyond that in a less fixed way, specifically about genres. And I really like what you're saying. Now, we're about to finish our podcast for today, but before doing that, I wonder if there is anything in the back of your mind, any burning comment that you want to share with our audience today before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. So I think one more element I just want, one more theme I wanted to talk about is, again, if still there is a question that what does it look like at a larger scale if we create those spaces. I think if there is one more strategy that could help you make sense of this complexity, because what I'm advocating is really creating more chaos in writing classes, because we need that, because we're too industrialized. In chaos in our writing classes, we can see the growth of organic engagement with text. But if you want to tame that chaos somehow, and we all want to do that as teachers, I think it's very important to think about publishing as part and parcel of the process of writing. So I think one question all teachers could have is, what is the outcome of my lesson or of my unit or of my semester? And isn't writing and isn't sharing text after producing it with the public a very natural step of doing that? So one major theme which came out of my research was how important publishing was to the writers that I interviewed and I observed. So consider publishing, consider project-oriented pedagogies as something that could harmonize all organic kind of engagement with text. So I think a movement towards project-based assessment might be a much better approach compared to kind of tight rubrics that sometimes that don't make a lot of sense to the students. I think publishing gives them this possibility to engage with an authentic audience, and that's when I think that's what could cause or what could create more organic writing practices. Yeah.
All right. Amir Kalan, thank you very much for coming today and help us understand a little bit more about writing processes that is not either or, but it's something that is beyond that, that is working around the chaos, but also trying to find the sweet spot and the balance in an organic engagement with the students, thinking about and moving away from the cookie cutter assessment way of doing rubrics to, like you said, more organic, project based assessment. Thank you so much for coming today to the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. You're doing a wonderful podcast, and I'm really happy to be a part of this.